Hello, and welcome to the Scope of Things podcast, a no-nonsense look at the promise and problems of clinical research based on a sweep of the latest news and emerging trends in the field and what I think is worthy of your 30 or so minutes of time. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News, which means I spend a lot of time with my ear to the ground on your behalf and a lot of hours every week speaking to top experts from around the world. Please consider making this your trusted go-to channel for staying current on things that matter, whether they give us hope or cause for pause. In just a few minutes, you'll be transported to the exhibit hall of the recently concluded Scope Europe event in Barcelona, where Alison Proffitt, editorial director for Cambridge Innovation Institute, sat down with a few folks for a Q&A on how AI is being used for clinical trials, their pick for the 2024 rising star in the clinical research ecosystem, and the debatable ways of planning and executing trials. But first, the latest news, including a drug repurposing AI model whose predictions will now be tested in rare disease clinical trials, a new way forward with triple-negative breast cancer, Jill Pellegrino's transition from CVS to auto-recruitment, the case for incorporating placental pathology into prospective clinical trials, the call to make ethical oversight of clinical trials more fit for purpose, and publication bias with industry-sponsored studies for psychiatric drugs. Diseases without cures, including all but 5 to 7% of more than 7,000 identified rare conditions, may start finding some treatments thanks to a zero-shot AI drug repurposing model built by scientists at Harvard. The so-called TXGNN model was trained across more than 17,000 diseases, using the larger amount of molecular data available on some conditions to ramp up the predictive power for diseases having much sparser associated information. In a new study, TXGNN was used to rank nearly 8,000 drugs approved or in clinical trials based on their treatment utility and side effects, and many of the top-ranked drugs aligned well with off-label prescribing already going on. Some of the disease drug predictions are now expected to be tested in clinical trials conducted by the nonprofit EveryCure and various rare disease foundations. Importantly, the AI tool includes an explainer module indicating the existing medical knowledge most relied on when making a prediction. TXGNN is being made freely available to any clinician scientist in search of new therapies. You can find a link to the Nature Medicine article in the show notes and a more plain language story on the drug repurposing model in BioIT World. A new study finds a drug that inhibits rather than degrades the estrogen receptor may be a better treatment than AstraZeneca's fulvestrant for the treatment of triple-negative breast cancer, soundly confirming its suspicion that the biology of the disease is affected by hormonal status. The plan is to launch a so-called window trial, where up to 50 patients are given the novel drug known as lasofoxifene for a brief period prior to starting curative intent therapy to look for biomarkers of effectiveness, one of the more important ones being a little-known type of white blood cell called eosinophils. A traditional clinical trial is expected to be the next step, and soon. In earlier testing as an osteoporosis treatment, it was found to work well, be easy to tolerate, and to have an excellent safety profile. Longer term, researchers hope to test its ability to increase the pathological complete response rate, which even with contemporary therapy sits at around 65%, with most of the rest ultimately developing metastatic disease. Lasofoxifene could potentially have applications for patients with melanoma and cancers found in the colon, lung, head, and neck. It is already the subject of phase 3 clinical trials sponsored by Sermonix Pharmaceuticals as a treatment for breast cancer, harboring mutations in the ESR1 estrogen receptor. Links to both the study and a story appearing in Clinical Research News are in the show notes. Earlier this year, Jill Pellegrino, the one-time VP of Recruitment and Real-World Evidence for the now-shuttered clinical trial business CVS Health, became CEO of auto-recruitment. Her focus remains on the chronic trial recruitment problem and using data and national reach to connect people to studies that might be right for them. But the means is new, a multifaceted screening methodology aimed at the estimated 90% of the population who don't get the opportunity to participate in research because their physician doesn't. Its platform also tackles the challenge of ensuring people qualify for a study based on the often very narrow inclusion-exclusion criteria. So the pre-screening regimen goes 2 steps beyond online self-reporting to include follow-up phone screening with clinically trained staff and asking for patients' permission to get access to their electronic medical records so the data can be summarized with the aid of artificial intelligence for recruiting study sites. You can read all about it in a story that was published recently in Clinical Research News, or listen to Jill's earlier guest appearance on episode 12 of this podcast, which I provided links for in the show notes. Perinatal pathologists are calling for placental pathology to be incorporated into prospective clinical trials so they could start telling clinical providers what the findings in their reports mean. For want of funding and the relevant diagnostic expertise, the placenta has long been a woefully under-investigated organ that could be providing critical insights on pregnancy-related conditions like preeclampsia and preterm birth that are currently defined solely based on a clinical diagnosis. The trials would likely need the support of the Maternal Fetal Medicine Unit Network and the Neonatal Research Network, both funded by the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. The first step, now underway with the support of various patient advocacy groups, is to standardize placental pathology diagnostic criteria. The roadblocks in obstetrics are like those seen in the cancer field 50 years ago, before oncologists and pathologists got together to start learning from tumors rather than tossing them out. I'll link to the insightful opinion piece in the show notes, but you can also look for a full story on the matter in Diagnostics World News. A call has also gone out for making the ethical oversight of clinical trials fit for purpose. The argument is that the degree of oversight should be based on two morally relevant features of a trial, one being the degree to which risks and burdens increase or change when research is integrated into clinical care compared with what patient participants would have experienced in care absent the research. And the second is whether the activity restricts meaningful patient decision-making about care. For an increasing number of studies conducted in clinical contexts, notably comparative effectiveness research, the underlying assumptions about increased risks and uncertainties don't always hold, and thus imposing the same oversight approaches that are needed for evaluations of experimental, unapproved, or newly introduced modalities is problematic. Although an analysis was done in the U.S. regulatory context, other countries are struggling with the same issues. Authors of the Special Communication in JAMA offer up two practical recommendations, including guidance from federal regulators for research qualifying as minimal risk and guidance encouraging alteration of consent as a viable option. You'll find a link to that article in the show notes. Finally, when drug manufacturers fund clinical trials, psychiatric drugs get a significant boost from the so-called sponsorship effect. A recent analysis by a researcher at The Ohio State University finds that the same drugs are reported to be about 50% more effective in industry-sponsored studies than those sponsored by other groups, even after controlling for the way the trials are planned or conducted. The study did an apples-to-apples comparison of more than 500 double-blind randomized controlled trials for either antidepressants or antipsychotics. It concluded that publication bias was to blame, since factoring in all the unpublished papers changed the results. The requirement to pre-register trials on clinicaltrials.gov has helped lessen the bias, but it clearly has not been a cure-all, since only 1/4 of all pre-registered trials report results, and it doesn't fix what has gone on in the past. The study was published in the Journal of Political Economy, and you can get to it via the show notes.
Are you enjoying the conversation? We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating. It helps other people find and join the conversation. If you've got speaker or topic ideas, we'd love to hear those too. You can send them in a podcast review.
It is now time to hear from a specially convened focus group at Scope Europe, recorded on site at the event with editorial director Allison Proffitt, serving as the podcast roving reporter. Let's listen in.
Hi, I'm Nicole Stansbury. I'm Senior Vice President of Global Clinical Operations at Premier Research.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Crowther. I am the Head of Predictive Analytics within Pfizer's PRD, so that's Pfizer Research and Development.
And hi, I'm Farrell Healion, and I am the head of the Emerging Technologies Group in their biopharm clinical operations at AstraZeneca.
All right, so we're going to start with ChatGPT. Are you using it? Do you think you would ever use it? Are there other sorts of AI tools in your clinical trials work that you're using?
ChatGPT is kind of a tricky one. Don't know if this is quite the space for it or if it's ready for it yet. I could see having something available at some point in the future for patients when they have questions to reach out and get information, or for sites when they have questions about the protocol and being able to get some quick answers. But as a consumer of all things that are way simpler than clinical trials, like booking an airline flight or changing a trip, I want to talk to a person, even for the simplest questions. I don't know if this industry is quite ready for that yet. Other AI tools I think are great. We use AI tools in our requests for information that come in from the many different sponsors that we work with questions about our procedural documents and what our information about our company. Those things are easier, I think, to use AI tools on to be able to help us be more efficient and effective in our use of time.
That's a great question. Yes, but not in the way that people typically realize ChatGPT is used. So we have a much more secure version of it, which is really relevant and trained to Pfizer processes, Pfizer data. And we're also taking it in a very kind of secure way to make sure that data doesn't leak outside of Pfizer as well. So in essence, yes, but in a very different way than people typically know ChatGPT.
And I wish it had access to our processes and could pull out the SOPs, but we have a similar thing going on where it's kind of like sticking to protecting our information and not allowing for the leaks. But in terms of how to use it, I think a lot of it is more just using it as a tool to help get answers, reword things, and probably, things like how can we make some wording be more simple if we're trying to put something for a patient or trying to explain things to sites.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to move on from ChatGPT. That was the hard one. We opened hard. I'm not sure this is actually going to be any easier. So if you had one vote, keeping in mind everything you've learned in this day and a half at Scope Europe, if you had one vote for the rising star in the clinical research ecosystem, a personality, a technology, or a startup company, who would you vote for? And it can't be yourself.
I don't know that I could name a company, but I would say it would be a technology company that is global, not just functioning in one region. It would need to be able to do multiple things and solve multiple problems for us and not a one-trick pony. We've got a lot of one-trick ponies, I think, out there. CROs and sites are overwhelmed with the choices, and I think we need to simplify, streamline, join forces. I think that would be the company of the future that would be super beneficial to the industry.
Jonathan, to you.
I think it's a person for me who sticks out, and that would be Ryan Copping. So he heads up data science within Genentech, and I think there's two reasons why I go for that. He has a really nice idea about how do I merge all different sources of data to leverage the best he can to be able to deliver in Genentech's portfolio. And then the second part, which is a bit altruistic, is that he comes from a fundamental research background like many of us. And his idea is how do we actually share the techniques and the approaches and the models that we're doing? And I think that's something we really need to get back to as a research group overall, is to say, I should be sharing with you what I'm doing and I should be sharing with me so that the patients are benefiting the most. So that's who I would nominate.
Farrell?
So obviously myself, but otherwise, don't know if he's considered a rising star because he's probably already a star, but really appreciate Brad Hightower just to get that, no filter site perspective, which helps to actually know what are the problems that need solving for its sites, because if you don't know, you can't solve it. So it's refreshing to get the real world view.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Last question for your on-site Scope of Things podcast interview. What have you observed to be the most hotly debated topic when it comes to trial and execution? And tell me both sides, not just one. Okay. I'm going to go the other way. Farrell, starting with you.
Sure thing. For me, it's trial complexity, because everybody says technology makes things harder, but it also makes things simpler downstream, because if you have structured data, analysis and, monitoring becomes easier. Obviously, it means that you have a bit more effort up front, but it's that if you want to plan for success, plan for what timeline it needs to actually set things up properly. And then the counter argument, if you remove the technology, it's simpler, but it's not really. It just adds extra admin and less visibility and more potential quality issues.
All right, Jonathan, what's your take?
It has to be the survey. 6 years later, it's still driving me crazy. I think it's a really interesting dynamic, because we have sites saying, hey, we need to release the burden on the sites, and they're busy. We get that. But then on the other side, we also see that we get a lot of inconsistent results from a sponsor side. So really what we're trying to do is, how do we identify effective ways of making the site selection? And so for me, I can see at the site, absolutely, I care about how they're working. I want to make sure we're not adding more burden, painful processes for them. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we have the right resources in place and we have the right sites for our trials. And so for me, that's definitely one that I still want to solve. And I'm struggling today, after having so many talks in over the last 2 days about surveys, what is really the right approach?
And I think my topic will be one that ties into both of what you were talking about, which is protocol amendments. And are we ready to actually start the study? Or should we wait until we're sure we're ready to start the study and then let's proceed? We are spending so much time burdening everyone, adding unnecessary cost to resubmissions, to timelines. If we really sat down and looked at it, it would probably be cheaper and faster if we just waited until we were absolutely sure, whether it's doing feasibilities, doing more risk assessments on the protocol from the beginning instead of just talking about it. But we've got to decrease the number of protocol amendments because it's burdening the entire system.
Coming from a software background, a nice anecdote that I always remember is I don't have enough time to do it right once, but I have enough time to do it twice.
Or 6 times.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Are you coming to Scope in U.S., do you think? Will I see you there? I've got nods. Yeah. Ooh, big shrug over here from AstraZeneca UK.
Oh, that's because we're all about the carbon, so we have to try and keep our travel local as possible, I'm afraid.
I understand. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
A big thank you to Allison and today's special guests for sharing their on-the-ground insights. And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd also be so very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review while you're there. One final note. If you like today's show, it's only a glimpse of news and insights we have on tap for the next Scope event taking place in sunny Orlando, Florida. Please plan to join me there February 3rd through the 6th, 2025, and be sure to use discount code SOT10 for a 10% discount off any current rate. For more information, visit scopesummit.com. Bye for now.